This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Ziak and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. And this, Jay, is our last review. We have one more episode after this, our year wrap up. But this is it. The final, well, for the free podcast, there'll be an 80s episode for our Patreon community, which they're currently voting on.
Are we going to go out strong, or
I guess we'll find out.
we're just going to fizzle?
So this is from one of our polls, one of our tournaments of death. The 27 albums knocked down to one winner over 4 consecutive weeks. Each month we do it. This was the November tournament. There were a lot of really interesting choices going into this one. I was not sure exactly who was going to win, but there were a lot of options that I was like, that would be fun. Oh, that would be cool. And when it got down to the final 6, I don't know about you, but I was like, those are all really good choices. Like, it was a diverse amount of options. So let's talk
That's
about
what we've come
bit.
to expect with this little tournament we're doing. Our listeners keep it interesting. I don't think we've had a poll that has been not diverse. What's the homogenous? What's the opposite of diverse?
Yes, you're right. Homogenous.
There you go. I don't think we've had one that's been homogenous. They're all
Sweden.
Surprisingly,
That would be the opposite of diverse.
Sweden.
Yeah. No, I'm kidding. I love the Swedes. They make excellent meatballs. Let's go to what the picks were submitted via our website, Jay, digmeoutpodcast.com. For the folks out there who don't know, all you have to do is go to the suggested album page, drop it in there, and then it goes into our hopper, and 27 albums are picked. I imagine we made a pretty good dent in the hopper.
We did. I need to do a tally to see where we're at, but we should have made a huge dent this year. We started this in June, I think.
Yeah.
So it's not a full year of this new format, but we're moving through a lot of records, which has been fun from just to get exposed to so many records so much faster.
Now, any album that lost can be resubmitted, but just not by the same person who previously submitted. And yes, we are paying attention. So let's go through real quick all the picks that came in. Round 1 was The Fluid, Purple Metal Flake Music, Brother Kane's Wish Pool, Breaking the Ethers by Tuatara, Come Find Yourself by Fun Loving Criminals, Bricks Are Heavy by L7, A Storm in Heaven by The Verve, Remember by Rusted Root, Gimme 5 by The Killjoys, and Killed for Less by Sensefield. And the 2 winners out of round 1 were Fun Loving Criminals and L7. Interesting. Those are not in the same ballpark musically. So round 2, what do we got? Hope and Atoms by Wheat, Letting Off Happiness by Bright Eyes, Please Kill Yourself So I Can Rock by Love 666. That's a interesting album title. The self-titled album by War Babies, Reject All American by Bikini Kill, Sugar Fix by Dwarves, Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars by Creedle, Loveless by My Bloody Valentine, and Bad Out of Hell 2, Back into Hell. Or is that Bad Out of Hell 3? Is there, or how many are Bad Out of the Hells are there?
That would have been 2.
2? When did 3? Isn't there a third one?
Let my crack research team look that up for you.
Whatever. I know
I'm sure there was. If there isn't, then there will be.
Yeah.
Because it's, an easy way to make money.
So out of that, our winners were My Bloody Valentine and Bikini Kill. So again, not in the same ballpark. I mean, they both have guitars and bass and drums. Round 3, Big Red Letter Day by Buffalo Tom. Take It From the Man by the Brian Jonestown Massacre. Instant Winner by Distorted Pony. Numb by Hammerbox. Dayglo by Love Battery. Sweetwater's self-titled album. God Lives Underwater's self-titled album. The Apple Bed by Nick Hayward. And Black 14 by April's Motel Room. And the two out of that one were Love Battery and Buffalo Tom. So our final 6, Buffalo Tom, Love Battery, My Blood Valentine, Bikini Kill, L7, and Fun Loving Criminals. An interesting group, to say the least. And the winner from that, with 31% of the overall vote, Dayglo by Love Battery. That was like, when I was looking at that, I thought that's probably the third or fourth choice. I was fairly shocked that one won it. But there's rationale, and we'll get to the comments. But behind that, Fun Loving Criminals was real close with 26%. And then My Bloody Valentine and Bikini Kill tied with 14%, Buffalo Tom with 10%, L7 with 5%. At one point, it looked like Fun Loving Criminals was going to win.
I know.
Jeremy Amen said, well, break out the Scooby snacks when they were ahead. Justin Moore said, in an ideal world, Buffalo Tom would be storming ahead as it holds a very special place in my heart, though I haven't played it in an age. I guess My Bloody Valentine would be too obvious a choice, so I've given my vote to Fun Loving Criminals. Andrew O.C. went with Love Battery. Joe Royland went with Buffalo Tom. Kyle Bittner, again, Fun Loving Criminals. I should point out that in this final 6, 3 of them were suggested by Gary Moran. That's those, Gary, man, that guy needs to go to Vegas.
Is there a casino game where you can pick records and
pick albums? An album tournament. So this is what he said when he submitted Love Battery and their album Dayglo. He said, Love Battery was in the right place at the right time to be hugely successful. Signed to Sub Pop in 89, the band's grungy psychedelic tinge sound fits well with their contemporaries, such as Pearl Jam and Mother Love Bone. When Dayglo was released in 1992, the band had included members of Mudhoney, Skin Yard, and the U-Men. The rhythm section was highly fluid and would soon have ties to Green River, Mother Love Bone, Presidents of the United States of America, Posies, and the Fastbacks. Despite being deeply ingrained in the Seattle scene, Love Battery struggled to find a consistent lineup and a larger audience. So a couple other comments. Bill Davidson went with Bikini Kill. Jim Copany said that we were being tortured by the FLC surge. I assure you, sir, that would not have been torture. I know Fun Loving Criminals from a couple songs, and I don't mind them.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Showing your cards there for the Fun Loving Criminals review that we'll inevitably have to do.
It's inevitable. Bill Hampton went with Buffalo Tom. Bill Flaming went with Love Battery, the true underdog of sub pop stars. And Gavin Reed said, I am so disappointed. I think that's when Fun Loving Criminals was ahead. So hopefully his sadness was mitigated. So Jay, had you heard Love Battery? I know we've listened to a lot of Seattle bands. Obviously.
Yeah. No, I always get them confused with Skin Yard.
I got them confused with Truly. Like there's that band Truly from Seattle, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
And I thought so we didn't know who they were.
I had heard the name, but like I said, those two, for whatever reasons, I interchanged those two bands in my mind and assumed that they sound the same.
Let me give you a little bit of history, expand upon what Gary had mentioned.
History of the band.
Formed in 89, Ron 9, whose name is Ron Rodzitzis. Not sure how to pronounce that. He was in a band called Room 9. And he formed this band with Kevin Whitworth, bassist Tommy Simpson, and Dan Peters, who was the drummer in Mudhoney. And they took their name from a song by the Buzzcocks. Dan Peters ended up leaving the group. I mean, he was busy with Mudhoney, so that kind of makes sense. And he was replaced by Jason Finn, who was the drummer in Skinyard, or had been the drummer in Skinyard. So they record an EP. It gets released by Sub Pop. At that point, Tommy Simpson, the bass player, was replaced by Jim Tillman, who was the bassist in the U-Men. So when they actually released the EP, that was the lineup, and they recorded together Dayglo. Now, that doesn't last long. Jason Finn would leave, and he would become the drummer in the Presidents of the United States of America.
Okay.
And at some point,
Is that the drummer on this record?
yes,
Okay.
he's the drummer on this record. Jim Tillman is the bass player on this record. And then a couple years later, so this album comes out, I don't think I mentioned that, January 28th, 1992 on Sub Pop. Within a couple years, or within a short period of time, Tommy Simpson replaced Jim Tillman. And then in the same year, he left the band again and was replaced by Bruce Fairweather, who has been in a number of bands.
Mother Love Bone.
Exactly. And then Dan Peters from Mudhoney comes back to play drums when Jason Finn leaves, and then he leaves again, and Mike Musburger, who played in the Posies, comes in to play drums. So basically, if you were in a Seattle band, there's a good chance that you played bass, drums, or guitar in Love Battery. You might not even know that you did, but you might have played bass in this band.
You were in a studio, you laid down a track, and next thing you know,
it's on a Love Battery song. So they put out 5 records. Actually, 4. Sorry. They put out Between the Eyes EP came out before the album Dayglo in 92. Then they released Far Gone in 93. That also came out on Sub Pop. And nothing happened for them. So they leave Sub Pop and they signed to Atlas Records. Now, Atlas was part of Polydor, really more known for jazz on the Polydor side. So they didn't get a lot of attention.
Yeah.
It was when, labels were just swallowing up any sort of alternative rock band that they could. So 95, they put out Straight Freak Ticket, and it does nothing. They break up, get together, blah, blah, blah. Numerous lineup changes. And they signed to C/Z Records, which is a Seattle-based label that released the original Deep Six compilation, which we reviewed many, many years ago. And they put out albums by bands like 10 Minute Warning, Alcohol Funny Car, Built to Spill, Hammerbox, the Melvins, Skinyard, Silkworm, many other bands. So they were like the little brother, or I don't think they probably want to be described that way, but they were also a Seattle label like Sub Pop, but just not as well known. And after 99, they were done. So they have continued to play together off and on over the years. In 2006, there was a reunion with 3 of the 4 original members, with Mike Musburger on drums. Then in 2012, they got together with a different bass player and drummer entirely. And then they got together again in 2018 with Jim Tillman, the bass player from this record that we were talking about, on bass, and Jason Finn back from the Presidents of the United States on drums. They have reissued, just I think in the past year or so, this album. And it was in fact not just reissued, but they did a remaster with the guy who's the resident Sub Pop and Seattle producer, whose name is escaping me at this moment. But he worked on a ton of stuff. I'll find it somewhere. But anyway, so basically, if you were ever listening to this record and go, I wonder if it got a re-release and a remaster, it did. Cool. Just in the past year or so. Sub Pop didn't want to do it. Sub Pop was like, nobody's gonna bother with it. So they did it like on an indie label, connected to a record store in Seattle and Portland. Jack and Dino. That's who I was trying to remember. Jack and Dino did the remaster.
Makes sense.
So let's get into it. Let's talk about Dayglo by Love Battery. Tell me one thing you liked about this record.
It has a really interesting guitar interplay that I think plays well with its styles of music that they're interpreting here. So you hear a lot of this two guitar hard pan arrangement. So you got typically a guitar in your right ear that's playing fuzzy chords and riffs, fairly straightforward. And then you have a guitar in your left ear that is just playing sometimes just bizarre um counter melodies, dissonant things. Sometimes it gets bluesy and plays slide stuff. There's always this weird off kilter tension between the two guitars, and it's very like um consistent through the whole record. Like they stick to that mix, which I really like. Like it gives you a very clear um concept for the record, like spatially and from a format standpoint is very consistent that way. Um and then the styles of music they're playing, I think you touched on in the comments, it's like a really interesting mix of like psychedelic garage rock, maybe at the core of what they're doing. But then there's an attitude that is closer to maybe like Detroit MC5, the Stooges. There's even like some stuff here that gets into like a MC5 kind of boogie vibe, like See Your Mind has that Chuck Berry style guitar. But I think, because it's so fuzzed out and played louder and more, I guess, aggressively or, um, with a lot more energy, you just get this really amped up version of, I guess, psychedelic garage rock. Um, because when you break down some of these songs, it's, I think, very much the format of them and maybe the like seed of the song feels very like traditional in a way, but because I think the volume and the way it's recorded and just the energy and all the fuzz, it becomes this whole new thing. Even like you kind of hear like even in some of the vocals, I'm thinking of, let's see, I think it's See Your Mind. There's this uh counter vocal that is very like 60s garage rock pop kind of sound. So I think on the surface, though, my first impression of it was like, oh, this is like a Seattle grunge record, like Mudhoney-ish, Skinny Yard-ish, like, okay, get it. And on repeated listens, and as I really digested it, I was like, oh, okay, I really am getting more deeply what this band is doing. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the production, in terms of how the guitars are handled, specifically, just give it such a cohesive format that even when they diverge a little bit and get heavier, turn up the fuzz, get bluesier, get trippier, like it all still holds together, I think, because they're so consistent with that production technique. So that's some of the stuff I liked. What about you?
Agree on all that. I think this album, I think when people think about Seattle, most people go Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Nirvana, Pearl Jam.
Yeah.
But then there's that like second layer of the stuff that we're more aware of because of the show and because we were music nerds and stuff. The Mother Love Bones, the Green Rivers. That's when you get into like not just Screaming Trees, but like the whole sound of Screaming Trees, where they
Yeah.
started out a little bit more psychedelic and a little bit more strange than where they ended up. And there was this aspect of that Seattle sound where there was as much of like a weirdness
Yeah.
as there was a heaviness. And I think this record kind of captures that really well because it's a guitar record, but the bass and drums are really, really good. Like the bass playing on this record is
Yeah.
really good and really interesting.
Mhm.
On Foot, he's doing some interesting stuff. I guess it's Jim Tillman. And overall, there's like, you can tell that these are like, they bang these out in the practice space for a long time,
Yeah.
like figuring these parts out and jamming. It sounds like a lot of fun. It's energetic in a way that some of those bands were a little bit more dirgy. And this
Yeah.
is like, I think that your call out to the Detroit sound is spot on. Because of the weirdness and the psychedelic aspect of some of the stuff mixed with the high energy of those bands. I was really enjoying it's kind of a soup. It's not a
Yeah.
crystal clear mix.
Yeah.
And maybe when they remastered it, in the last couple of years, they cleaned some stuff up because it's kind of fuzzy and really mid, I guess. Like it's got it just envelops a lot of space.
Yeah.
Which is cool because a lot of those albums didn't, especially with the drop. I think so I did a little bit of reading, and a lot of like Alice in Chains use drop D. Soundgarden would use drop D or other alternative tunings. This band used a lot of regular tuning, but then also tuned to C, not drop C, but to C,
Okay.
which is, I guess you use that if I would guess you're using that for slide, when you
Yeah.
do some like weird tunings for slide parts. So I think that opens you up to like just different voicings on the guitar and it just creates a weirder sound. I mean, because you know it from playing guitar. If you hear somebody who's just playing like power chords,
Yeah.
you know what that is. You can tell
Yeah.
right away. Or if you hear somebody playing drop D, like like a Helmet song or something like that, it's pretty easy to pick out. But sometimes when you hear a band like this, where they're using slide in this unusual way, which they do a couple times on the album, that's when they're integrating some weirder open tunings and stuff like tuning to C and whatnot. And I really like that aspect of it because it's a little bit. There were parts of it that even reminded me of like British bands from this era, like
Yeah.
Ride and stuff.
Yeah.
It just had that like energy.
Vocally a lot too.
Yes, because the vocals are fine, but they're not overwhelming. They are a part of the mix of the songs and they serve the songs, but there's no Smells Like Teen Spirit on here in comparison or Nearly Lost You. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What's interesting about the British call out is that I heard that as well. In fact, I have a note here. You at times, it almost sounds like, um, Screaming Trees mixed with Stone Roses through, like, a garage band aesthetic. If you can imagine those things being matched together. Uh, the thing that's interesting about that is that, a lot of the early '60s garage bands were a response to British music.
Hmm.
So, maybe that's what we're hearing is, like, a love and a foundation in that music, which is also referencing, you know, British rock and roll.
Right.
So
Yep.
it's kind of maybe coming from a similar place.
And you can also hear the influence of the garage aspect in a song like Damaged. That to me has a very Mudhoney vibe to it. It's a little
Yeah.
sloppy. Things get a little out of tune here and there with that slide, but it has a coolness factor that is able to sort of reel it in. Um,
I even heard
and
like uh, a song like Side With You is a little different from what we're talking about. It steps into maybe like a Dinosaur Jr. kind of place with those
because they
big
double the
chunky
acoustic and the
chords
electric.
and yeah, they added the acoustic and the guitars are huge. It's a different type of beat rhythm. It's halftime and not really related to all the genres we talked about. It still works, like, it fits on
Hmm.
the record, but you can tell, like, it's stylistically, like, or maybe from a songwriting standpoint, maybe coming more from that, it's sort of a Dinosaur Jr. inspiration.
Absolutely hear that. That I had that as one of my notes was as soon as I heard that acoustic and electric thing happening, which was such an 80s alternative and into the 90s thing to
Yeah.
do.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know why that became a thing. It doesn't seem to happen anymore. Like it was very specific to those couple of
Yeah.
decades. I was like, oh, that sounds like Dinosaur. Yeah, that's got a Dinosaur Jr. vibe. Um, which I mean, some of the dynamics, like on Out of Focus and um, Cool School, like I can hear some up tempo Dinosaur Jr. riffing
Yeah.
on some of those songs. So, I mean, it would not surprise me at all if those guys had Dinosaur Jr. albums from the 80s in their record collection when they were,
Yeah.
growing up. I don't know how old they are in comparison to J Masses. I got to imagine they're probably around the same age since they formed in '89, but maybe a few years younger. Um, what didn't work for you on the record?
Probably biggest thing would just be the vocals are just kinda inconsistent.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean that from more an identity standpoint. I'm
Yeah.
not quite sure, like, just when I think I know what they're doing vocally and, like, what the band is, trying to do from a songwriting standpoint and overall presentation, there'll be a section or part of a song or, like, the whole sort of the way the record ends with Dayglo and 23 Modern Stories, like, the the vocals getting more buried behind the guitars. It's not cutting through. It's uh, damaged the whole first section of that song. It's kind of super pulled back and distant. Just not quite sure like vocally what they're trying to do. And it's interesting because like a song like Foot, by the end of that song, I'm really getting the vibes of like early Nirvana. And that's a band that was coming from a similar place, um, like, not just from location, but I think from roughly what they're trying to do, what their inspiration is. But with obviously with Nirvana, there was like a very like coherent approach on like this is what we're doing vocally. This is things are tighter. We're trying to write songs that are pop sort of foundational. Um, and that gets too murky on this record. I kind of like the range. I like when it goes off the rails a bit. I like the energy. I just wish there was just a bit more cohesion with the vocals. A song like I mentioned, "See Your Mind" is a good example where you just see the potential. Like if they could do something like that consistently through the whole record, where the vocals are really integral to the song, really well thought out, interesting, not just like following the guitar lines all the time. I think you really have something remarkable
Hmm.
and just not quite realized as well as I think they could be. And maybe that had something to do with, ultimately the band's level of success. But yeah, the vocals for me have just inconsistent. They can be at times like really strong and compelling, and other times just meh. How about you? What didn't work?
This is the perfect band for having like a group shout or chorus.
Yeah.
When they have a big chorus and it's not like it doesn't hit you real hard, like there should be like the bass player and the other guitar player just shouting it with you, and that's not happening. There's some mixing issues like on Blonde. There's basically no cymbals on that song. It
Oh,
is the
really?
guitar is so heavy and big.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you listen to that, you can hear them being hit, but they're so washed out.
Yeah.
The back three songs are okay. They're not my favorite
Yeah.
tracks. I think just they're just a little less interesting. Like I go back to like Foot, like I don't know what he's doing. He's doing this like "Ooh," like this harmonic thing on the bass. It's
Mhm.
really interesting. I would have never thought to play what he's playing. I would have just been playing root notes.
Yeah.
And he is doing this really interesting bass part. Um, I agree. I mean, I've been curious to listen to the remaster because I'm just listening to the original mix MP3s that I somehow have, probably from the I Hate the '90s blog.
The one I'm listening to doesn't. Usually, you'll sort of see a date or something that denotes if it was remastered.
Hmm.
Um, it sounded okay to me, but the guitar, especially that guitar on the left, sometimes is like ridiculously loud. So, and it is mid-tony,
Hmm.
so I could see like it being remixed or in some speakers and situations. Like when I listened to it with my AirPods, it did not sound great. These headphones, it sounded fine. So it is a very guitar forward mix, and that sometimes with tones that are kind of nasty and gritty can be
Yes,
can be a little rough.
I did appreciate their. This could have easily gotten off the rails lengthwise, and it's a pretty tight record in terms. It's only 10 songs in 40 minutes
Yep.
or 41 minutes.
Yep.
They kept it to a vinyl, which is nice. That's a rarity for this this era. Um, But other than that, I mean, I kind of dig it just because of the fact that it's such a weird amalgamation of a bunch of different Seattle sounds
Yeah.
that it makes for a interesting, especially a headphone listen, because it's just like there's just stuff going on,
Yeah,
noises.
I agree. It's a fun headphone listen. Like I mentioned, once you pick up on the sort of how the guitars are mixed, it's really interesting. And I want to emphasize the point you're making about the bass because I don't think this production and I don't think the guitar approach is possible without a really good bass player.
Nope.
Um, he is holding all of this together. Just start with his first track, "Out of Focus." You listen to the guitar parts and like what's going on there. You can imagine a lot of like hearing a lot of local bands playing something like that, and it's sounding
Hmm.
horrible because the bass player's not very good. And when you listen to what the bass player is doing in this band, um, it's really doing a good job of like playing similar to the one guitar, but also adding these important accents that just open it up and give it all this depth. That suddenly, like when you've got the second guitar just meandering and playing weird dissonant notes, it's great. It's totally cool. Works. It sounds big, sounds super interesting, and you're sort of flying, spatial. Without that, it sounds like a train wreck.
Yeah,
So I think the bass on this record is very important.
absolutely. But at the same time, I can see why this would be a absolutely tough sell to send a radio. Like Sub Pop is sending you Alice in
Yeah.
Chains and these well-crafted, hooky hard rock songs. And you're getting Nirvana, obviously. You're getting Soundgarden. This is not in that realm. It's a cool record, but
Yeah.
it's just a little too out there for I think that period.
Well, when
So
you were describing like the levels of bands from Seattle, the bands that you have on the second level are like also the bands that were broke, that were big on the top level that
mhm.
they were all fans of,
Yeah.
or had friends that were in, or we used to be in but left. There's sort of like the soul of the scene, and I would say this band probably fits into that category.
Mhm.
And I wouldn't be surprised if like a lot of those much more successful bands were fans of this band.
They definitely seem like a band's band.
Yeah,
Like this would be the band that would always be opening for a slightly larger band because that band likes them.
right.
Yeah, which is also like a kiss of death.
Well, I think that's we cover those bands often on here. I think we kind of relate to those bands too.
Yes, absolutely. Let's give our overall ratings on this record. Is it a worthy album, a better EP, or a decent single? What do you say?
It's a worthy album. I like this quite a bit. I found it pretty accessible. The first listen it really grabbed me and gave me both kind of nostalgic vibes and made me want to go, listen to a bunch of Seattle stuff. But it's also weirdly modern, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. Like I could like if this record came out this year, it would be like the most hip thing ever.
Yeah, you're
Right?
right.
It would be all over our Discord and it'd be like, "Oh my god, this record's amazing." Like, anybody heard this band? Um,
Here's their
s
Bandcamp.
so it's weirdly classic, even though it definitely immediately made me think of Seattle. Um, and I enjoyed that kind of, back and forth. It sort of hit that sweet spot where it's like nostalgic enough that, kind of gets those warm feelings going, but it doesn't like sound dated or cheesy.
Yes.
Um, and really, there's a couple songs on here that I think the second half, some of them are better than the first halves. I think like Blonde is a good example of that. I think the last two tracks are not the strongest on the record. But all that said, I really like the sound of the band. And I think as a record, the fact that it's only 10 tracks, 40 minutes, I think it holds together really well. It's produced consistently. It has a very distinct, unique sound. So I think it's a worthy album. Where you at?
I agree. I bounced back to where the album was down last week. And
Living in Singleville.
yeah. Although people reminded me, I thought that maybe was my harshest review, but I guess I was pretty harsh on Throwing Copper by Live. I guess
Yeah.
I went to shit town on that one, so to speak. So yeah, I think that I'm actually
you have like one a year.
Yeah. I do think that the remaster, based on some of the issues with regards to, like I mentioned on Blonde, you can't hear the cymbals, at least in my MP3s. My MP3s might be 96K, I don't know. From 2002.
I mean, I listened to the track too. I didn't listen for the cymbals, and it just they merge with the guitars, so you just end up with this like shh.
Yes.
Stuff like the guitar distortion and the cymbals are all
you
just
don't
like
hear the ring out.
one frequency.
Yes.
Yeah.
So maybe the remastering helped that in terms of
for sure.
That's exactly the type of thing you want to be fixed. Because I don't think that having them poorly mixed in the first place is in relation to the rest of the record makes sense. Like the drums sound good on the rest of the record. It's just that one song is oddly
that's usually
mixed.
a compression issue.
So, two worthy albums from us on the final review episode of 2022. Where did we start 2022? I need to look at our do you remember, Jay? Do you remember what our first review of?
Oh my God. I can tell you here in a second.
Well, while you're looking that up, need to thank Gary Moran and everybody else who suggested a record for this tournament. And I'll mention again, you can go to digmeoutpodcast.com to suggest an album. You just go to the suggest an album page, you put your album title, your artist, and give us a little comment. While you're doing that,
was it White Stripes?
Was it the White Stripes album? Was that the first one?
Let me see. Season 12. Are we in season 12?
I believe so.
That would have been January 26th.
Oh no, it was. I know what it was. It was the Meat Puppets Too High to Die.
You're right. Meat Puppets, Suicidal Tendencies, White Stripes. Those were the first three.
Yep. Yes.
We started with Seattle and ended with Seattle. Or no, I'm sorry.
They're from
Arizona. I don't always think
but they
Seattle.
Well, because I Backwater sounds like a grunge song. Yeah. That's why. The only reason anybody knows the Meat Puppets is because, I mean, outside of like music fans.
Yeah.
But like the mainstream people who, know they only know Backwater and they all think it's a Seattle band.
Yeah.
They have no idea they're from Arizona, and they had like 6 albums before that. We'll get into the whole season next week. We'll look back on our favorite episodes.
Yep.
Lots of stuff to talk about. Want to remind folks that also there'll be an 80s episode this month, and you can listen by joining us at Patreon by going to digmeoutunion.com or dmounion.com. You get the 80s episodes. You get to vote in these fun tournaments. Anybody can suggest records. You can even vote on your own suggestion when it comes up. You get video of all these episodes because Jay and I are some handsome bros, and you want to check out our riz, as the kids say.
Our drip.
Yes. As we slay in our whips.
Our aesthetic.
Yes. How are you, fellow kids?
I use that line all the time. My daughter hates it.
What line do you use?
What's up, fellow kids?
Oh, what's up, focus? Yes.
Sometimes I change it to fellow youths.
Well, soon it'll be teens. What's up, fellow teens? There you go.
Tweens.
So, at Patreon, you can read the Box newsletter, which you can sign up for at our website. The Box newsletter includes a release calendar of new releases every week, music, movies, TV shows, books, etc., related to 80s and 90s music that we cover. It's also 2 reviews of new releases, either by myself or by patrons. They also suggest or give us 1-minute reviews for stuff that they're digging. And finally, Apple Podcasts is where you go to leave some positive feedback for this podcast. So for Jay, I'm Tim. We're out, and we'll be back next week with the final episode of 2022. Dig me out.